Welcome back to Advancing with Watercolor, and today we are up on the North Shore at the Gloucester, actually at Essex, at the Essex Shipbuilding Museum, where they have a lot of interesting things for us to paint. You can see an interior here that's going to be the subject for the day, but all over the grounds they have boats that are being renovated, they have workshops, they have a marina, they have all sorts of interesting places to poke your head into and motifs to be sketched and painted. It's very humid today, so we're trying to find shade, and we've located a quiet corner and looking into this workshop. Standing in the workshop, I got an idea for a composition. Here you can see the painting, and it's done on location, finished state, and we're going to recreate that in the studio today and give you an idea how it was put together. But I guess the overriding idea here is to create an interior to create a feeling of the light that comes into an interior and makes it glow, and to in terms of design, contrive a way to create some interesting light patterns in the dark interior and to connect those lights. So without further ado, let's get to work. We're going to be building our painting today in two stages: an underpainting followed by a more definitive, hard-edged, darker application. The underpainting is done to give us a bit of glowing color that's going to glow. And the air is dry enough that we can get away with it. Sometimes in the field, you don't have that option. You have to do everything in the same go. So I'm starting with warm hues primarily, and we'll introduce some cool hues to complement the warms. But at this point I'm thinking very abstractly in terms of shapes and thinking in terms of colors that I want to come through the final painting. And at the same time I'm thinking about isolating an interesting variety of shapes in the white paper. And purposely I'm not painting, except for the windows and floorboards, I'm not painting specific objects that if you looked at the photo, you saw things such as gloves, such as cans, such as tools, such as a vise, and this and that, all sorts of tools that you would find in a workshop. Rather, I'm just thinking light shapes, and I'm doing that, number one, to make the painting a little more fluid, number two, just to illustrate a point that we don't need a lot of information. We don't have to have each item that's there. We don't have to have a complete description of the items that are there. We can get by, and sometimes we get a better result by alluding to the abstract qualities or the patterns that we see. And that's what I'm going to focus on in this painting, is generating some interesting patterns and trying to build an integrity of those patterns by connecting the lights as the painting is finishing. This stage is rather fun because we're very free and loose and blending colors, adding colors to our whim as much as anything else. It's dried off now. You can see the patterns of light shapes, and you can see that's sort of how they're connected and how they represent, in some case, they represent the windows or the tabletops. In other cases, they're just sort of random shapes. They can be made into very specific objects, but as I said, I'm going to avoid that in this painting and just try to keep in mind the abstract nature of the scene, a feeling of light, a feeling of color, a feeling of a glowing light in the interior, and the light falling on smaller pieces of objects that come between the light and the floor. Since the painting's dried off, now I can approach it with a much more stroke-oriented approach. I can use my darks and blend colors on the paper. Painting is going to have an overall warm quality with a few cools dispersed in the painting to kind of give us a focal point and give us a little counter to all the warms. We need that in the painting. If it's only warm hues, it can be rather boring. So the cool hues that we use, they complement the warms. That's the function, as it were, of the cool hues, is to complement these warms, and at the same time make them read a little more clearly, at the same time make them vibrate a little more strongly. Some of the strokes that I use are quite important. The angled strokes on the tabletop describing papers, or the shadows that fall across the tabletop. The strokes that define the light from the windows that falls on the floor. These will be strokes that are repeated through the motif to kind of drive home the intensity of the light and the particular angle of the light. It also helps these oblique shapes, these oblique angles, create their own energy. If everything is horizontal and vertical, it's balanced, but it's not quite as energetic as seeing some strong oblique marks or oblique shapes. At the same time, I'm starting to refine the white areas. You notice me cutting through with brush strokes, adding details. I'm still keeping a lot of the white paper with the idea that I'm going to refine that towards the end of the painting, put some light washes on areas that I want to retreat, and leave white where I want a corner to come forward, where I want an edge to be present, etc. And this dark is really starting to help the feeling of the interior. An interior is dominated by darks, but the darks should not be, in my opinion, they should not be flat. They should have a sort of warmth or glow to them. And so I'm trying to, at the same time I'm adding a dark, I'm adding a little bit of water or a little bit of cooler color so that that underpainting of strong ochres and reds can come through. It's kind of funny, we went into the field today, but yet I'm painting in an interior. It's so easy to see why these subjects of a workshop where someone spends their days and builds things, puts things together, they all have a personality. They have a sort of quality to them in the randomness, in the things that are scattered around, and the unfinishedness of the boards. They have a quality that is attractive and speaks of something that's being used, speaks of something that has a life to it, and a lot of character, I feel. So it's not strange, it's no wonder that this subject attracted me and that I can find a painting in it. We could look to almost any corner within this room and find something of interest. And probably if we had more time, we could develop a few of these. It's a really interesting place. I'll take a moment to give a shout out to the Essex Shipbuilding Museum. They like to have artists on their property. In fact, they host a couple of exhibitions each year, and they welcome the public. They're fond of artists coming onto the grounds and using the subject matter that's on the grounds for a motif in their painting. In the fall, they also help to host an annual competition, the Cape Ann Plein Air competition. A lot of artists work on the grounds and produce just beautiful paintings of schooners and other types of vessels. The workshops become a motif. The harbor that's alongside, the salt marshes that are further down the road, these all become motifs for the artists that visit the Cape Ann area in October. And this particular place, the Shipbuilding Museum, is a wonderful host, helping to host that event, helping to provide space for the artists, and certainly a lot of material for the paintings. So we're taking full advantage of that today. We set up shop in the morning. Since it's so humid, since it's so warm, we're already looking down the road to a place called Woodman's for a cold beer and maybe a lobster roll. Good way to finish the day, don't you think? Well, here you can start to see in the painting, look at how those lights have gained intensity. And while they're not anything in particular, I don't think I can point out the anvil or the teapot or the stump or the rope or this or that. I think they're all just broken shapes right now that will be used as a way to move the eye through the painting, from window to the center to the left and so on, and sort of entertain the eye as well. That was the goal in starting this painting, was to create an interesting pattern of light that moves across the scene, also to create that glowing quality of the interior. I continue to add darks and break up these smaller shapes. I went back to the edges of the windows. You probably noticed there's some blurry quality. I picked up a paper towel and a wet brush and blurred some of the edges so that we get a sense that light is actually streaming through almost a dusty atmosphere, where the atmosphere is tangible. It's not everywhere, but here and there we break it up so that we can get that feeling. Also, when we're placing elements such as these, the mullions, I take care not to make them too connected. I look at where they intersect as a place where I can perhaps place a stronger touch, but I like the broken lines because they also communicate that feeling that light is streaming in, kind of wrapping itself around any element that tries to prevent it from coming into the space. So it gives the light a tangible quality, and I love that quality of this interior where you can almost feel a weight to the light. Well, now you see I'm starting to knock back some of the whites. I'm starting to refine them a little bit, sort of like a stone might skip across a water surface. I want the eye to kind of skip across the painting from right to left and enjoy the variety of shapes without getting hung up too much on any one shape. Maybe that's a reason for not making shapes too specific. Is to allow the eye to move quickly through the painting or effortlessly through the painting. Continuing to refine the darks, you notice when I place a deep dark onto the lower section, how it starts to emit a glow. The yellow ochres coming through the painting of the dark on top, that alizarin crimson that was used in the beginning, also starting to come through the dark. This is one of the beauties of transparent watercolor, is that we can take advantage of that transparency and create a sensation that we feel in the interior, that sensation being glowing light bouncing off of the walls, light bouncing here and there, creating these glowing shapes. Also continuing to change the wash from left to right. It wasn't one color, if you remember. I went from yellow ochre to burnt sienna to ultramarine blue to alizarin crimson in the underpainting, and that is coming through now with perhaps even more strength because of the way the dark is amplifying it. Interiors are an interesting subject because of the strong contrast and the way that we can play with light as artists. I find that they're very evocative, especially a scene like this that has sort of a tangible, you can almost hear the hammer working, you can feel that someone is in here on a daily basis, there's stuff strewn around, it's not too neat. I like that quality, and I like that character, and so it's becoming a sort of a focal point in this painting. Look at how that cool green sets off all the warm tones. Just a tiny little touch, but plays a strong role in amplifying the color aspect of what might be a rather monochromatic painting if it went the way of a single color and single darks. These color relationships are helping each other in that sense. Not too much allusion to what's outside. If you look at the source photo, you'll realize that there was a lot of stuff outside and some interesting shapes. However, I wanted the viewer to remain solely entertained by what's going on in the interior, and that's why I've avoided doing much outside. I did play with a little bit of yellow and a little bit of blue in the window. I didn't leave them purely white because I need to see those strong whites at work on the interior. The angled lights, the whites of the paper that are the tops of tables or the tops of horizontal surfaces. I felt that to be a necessity in this painting. And so I did put a little color into the windows. Strokes I'm adding now are actually things that were there, these small ropes. There was a line of gloves that was hanging in one window. I decided to opt out of that because I felt it would be more confusing than entertaining. I'd rather just go with the lines themselves. And these lines help connect the pattern of lights, help to carry the eye through the painting. Also, they add a little bit of entertainment to the scene. Well, this is pretty much the finished piece. You can see the glow that I was speaking of earlier, the feeling of light streaming across the scene, the bright colors, the strong colors that were added at the end. They activate the underpainting as well. Putting a bright touch of red brings out all those warm tones that were part of the underpainting. Putting a sharp color of turquoise activates that blue that was painted in the early stage. So the color relationships are an important part of this painting. The play of light, the way the light moves through the scene as it bounces off of objects is a very important part. And connecting those lights, not leaving them as scattered bits, but rather connecting them so that your eye kind of follows them from right to left. Anyway, we had a great day on the North Shore at the Essex Shipbuilding Museum. You can find more work of this museum on my website. You can also find tutorials and links to other resources on my website. I hope it was entertaining, and we'll see you next week.